Nighttime on Still Waters. This is NB 506812, narrowcasting into the night from somewhere on Britain's waterways. 14th of February, Friday. Steel grey half-light. Rooks swing round the naked oaks. The daily clamour of heading for home. Roosting time. Their exuberant crow song and sense of life fill me with a nameless emotion. It's something about a longing for home. A cold easterly wind is still with us, rustling the dried reed blades and setting the burgundy deep alder shimmer. Heavy skies still prevail, and a full moon has come and gone without much evidence of it. All along the bank, the dark is cat quiet. Save for the flustered scurry in the vegetation at the waterline of a moorhen, set afright by unseen danger. But all is silent again. All is still, save the cold breath of wind dancing over the waters. And this is the narrowboat Erica, narrowcasting into the darkness of a mid-February night, to you, wherever you are. You made it. I was hoping you'd come. The kettle's on, the stove's been stoked, the biscuit barrel has been replenished. There's rain in the forecast, so come inside, out of the night, and welcome aboard. Dirty laundry water-coloured skies and clouds as heavy as soaked sheep's wool have persisted all week. Although it's kept the temperatures fairly stable, the highs and lows often only measuring a couple of degrees between them. And it has meant that, save for a couple of mornings of frost, we've not had any freezes, although the easterly wind has still kept its bite. And rain, when it comes, is undecided between straight rain or sleet. A pair of goldfinches have been visiting us recently, charming the older saplings and old willow herb tangles. And moorhens strut and fuss, becoming much more visible now as the days begin to lengthen. Soon we'll be having 10 hours of daylight. And the ducks are a joy, many of them paired, males tagging along behind the females, like husbands following wives around the supermarket aisles. There's something rather endearing about them. And earlier tonight, as darkness deepened, I could just make out the little figures afloat in the centre of the water. Their relaxed, chuckling chatter of companionship. I have to admit that this is a rather hurriedly put together episode, as I realise that I'm not going to be around to record one next week. So in order to avoid having a gap of 3 weeks between episodes, I thought I'd just try to get one in this week. And it also struck me that it's been a long time since I did any readings, and so thought that a winter night like this would make a perfect time to have a wintry-based one. Both the readings that I'll be doing tonight are from an excellent little anthology of writings about the inland waterways. It's called Up the Cut, and was compiled by Ivan E Broadhead, and was published in 1994 by Alan Sutton Publishing. And I think you'll enjoy them. Some listeners have commented recently that one of the things that they're appreciating about this podcast is a feeling of being in a community. And I think, particularly at the moment, that's something that's so important and to be cherished. And so it's lovely to hear from you, and thank you for all of your interactions and comments, even if it's just a thumbs up on a social media post. I really do appreciate them, and they're always warmly welcomed. And a quick hello and thank you to some of our listeners. And Deb Moon Mountford, I'm really glad that you like the new music so much. And Linda, I can totally understand how exhausting this all must be for you. And yes, we need these places, don't we? And it's lovely to hear from Margaret. Margaret, I'm really pleased that you have found that shift in music feels good. And yes, leaning on a nearby fence post probably should be mandatory. And hello to LJ and Bodhi. And I love that video of Bodhi in the snow, LJ. Thank you. Maggie would so love to experience that kind of snow. And hello also to Christine Hamill and to Jason Polite. And I hope that you enjoyed the episode. Over on YouTube, hello and thank you to Rebecca Cook. And thank you to John McMahon. And hello to Southern California. And also, it was lovely to hear from Vanessa on the Mindful Narrowboat vlog. And if you've not come across it yet, please check it out. It is wonderful. Hello and thank you to Mind Shambles. Yes, I too am looking out for some brightness to lighten our shared skies as well. And hello to Lee. And, oh Lee, how amazing it must have been to get elks coming up to your back door. And I love your description when you wrote, when returning this evening from running errands, I came home to a sharp wind carrying tiny dancing diamond dusts of new snow. And most wonderful of all, the return of the majestic elk herd to the stream valley just below my property. Oh, what a wonderful and treasured meeting that must be. And don't forget that you can contact me on a number of social media platforms. The details are below in the program notes, or via the nighttimeonstillwaters@gmail.com email address, or through the contact form on the NOSW Pod website. And a big thank you also to all of our Lockwheelers for continuing to support this podcast. They are Kevin B., Fleur and David McLaughlin, Lois Raphael, Sammy Walbury, Tanya Yorgay, Andrea Hansen, Chris Hines, David Durham, Chris and Alan on the narrowboat The Land of Green Ginger, Captain Arlo, Rebecca Russell, Alison on the narrowboat Mucker, Derek and Pauline on Silver Fox, Anna V, Orange Cookie, Mary Keane, Tony Rutherford, Arabella Holtzapfel, Rory with MJ and Kayla, the narrowboat Precious Jet, Linda Reynolds Birkins, Richard Noble, Carol Ferguson, Tracy Thomas, Mark and Tricia Stowe, and Madeline Smith. Thank you. Well, it might not be quite freezing tonight, but it's not far off. And the wind chill is bitter and is taking us well below zero. So let's just settle a little closer to the stove and lose ourselves in older worlds that had their own challenges and hardships, as I read two little passages about winter on the canals. The first reading is The Great Frost of 1895 and was written by Monica Bennett. And it's set on a canal that I'd never actually come across before I'd read it in this book. And it's even not too far away from us. It's called the Titford Canal, which is about 6 miles long, and is found to the west in the industrial heartlands to the west of Birmingham. The Great Frost of 1895. It was Saturday evening, and with a flickering twilight, a mighty shadow crept across the sky from the northeast. A rapid lowering of temperature, accompanied by icy rain, sent Midlanders scurrying home. Later that night, the wind shrieked to a crescendo, and roof tiles whirled like paper. An hour later, the cruel lashing wind subsided. Far away, high in the northern sky, a lone star glittered in the dark void. The Great Frost of 1895 was on. The following dawn broke crisp and sparkling clear, revealing a frost of unusual penetration, upon which the pallid sun made no impression. Within 2 days, the canals at Cakemore and the Jim Crow between Whiteheath and Oldbury, including the Swag and Titford pools, were frozen over, and the boating of coal was suspended. Gradually, the Arctic conditions became more intense. Water poured from a vessel turned to ice as it stuck to the floor. The ice boat was requisitioned, and with plenty of good boat horses, a determined but unavailing effort was made to keep the waterways passable, as this was of vital importance to the local collieries, which depended upon the canals as their principal means of transport. The canal mines affected were Heartlands at Whiteheath, Rowley Hall, Ramrod, and to some extent the Grace Mary and the Twin Pits. These dispatched their coal at Top End Wharf, the canal arm at the end of the Jim Crow Canal. For a time it was customary to take the boat 2 trips a day to keep the pack ice open, but during each succeeding night the ice became thicker. And at this time a Birmingham firm sent a boat containing a huge boiler and its equipment for boiling water and pumping it back into the canal at such a rate that expert engineers calculated it was capable of thawing the ice at least a mile each side of the boat. It was fixed at the junction of the canal coming from Whiteheath and the Jim Crow, at the corner of Titfield Pool, close to the Navigation Inn. The introduction of this device caused considerable criticism. People came from all parts of the district to watch results, crack jokes, and listen to the mirth of others. Jack Judge, of Tipperary fame, was one of the star jesters. For the first time in the history of the locality, the pubs ran short of beer, and one wag suggested that this was due to the supply of canal water being cut off. Skating on Titfield Pool was in full swing. The landlord of the new inn at Whiteheath, Mr. W. Cumley, an energetic and enterprising individual, had speculated much money over the course of several years in improving the banks of the Titfield Pool by planting trees and restocking the water with fish, as an inducement to local angling societies to spend their weekends close to home. But the Great Frost paid him much better dividends, judging by the enormous crowds of skaters. 6pence per day was paid, and braziers were kept burning into the night when there was a moon. And it became increasingly obvious that the experiment of boiling water was inadequate. Only a few feet from the boat was clear of ice. Then something went wrong with the mechanism one night, and before the necessary repairs could be made, it was frozen up, and remained so for another 10 weeks. The frost was serious for many people at Whiteheath, who were mostly miners, wharfmen or boatmen. Already some of the pits were on short time, being unable to clear the coal from the pit head. And every available horse and cart was requisitioned, and a continual procession of all kinds of horse-drawn vehicles wended their way through Whitechurch and Oldbury in order to keep the industry going. And during this journey, many of the people out of work pilfered coal from the carts. The drivers, of course, never looked back. The coal owners issued notices that such pilfering would be severely dealt with, but that, as a concession, the women could collect any coal that might roll off. The roads were very bad, and the drivers, many of whom were sons and husbands of the women, sought the rougher way. The falls were substantial and lucrative. Further to help, big stones and half bricks were planted in the road, and the drivers became so expert that they rarely missed taking one or other wheel over them. After about 7 weeks, there came a morning when it failed to get light, and neighbours asked each other in subdued tones what was coming. They were not kept in doubt very long, for a seeping, circular wind began to move around, followed by a scattering of very fine snow, so fine it was like flour, but very crisp. It became darker as the wind increased in velocity, and the snow in volume. People who were caught in it were almost blinded. Doors were packed with rugs, and even keyholes were plugged. For hours, the freezing blizzard lashed this part of the Midlands with raging fury. Traffic was completely suspended. Towards midday, however, it was almost spent, and looking out of a bedroom window, it resembled the vast frozen wastes of the Arctic. One day, 4 men pushed a handcart through Whiteheath and paused for a moment opposite the Bull's Head. On the cart was a block of ice sawn out of the canal wharf at Whiteheath. The block was about 3 foot square and 2 foot 6 inches deep. On either side hung a big card on which was written, "If your hearts are not as hard and cold as this block of ice, then give us help for the out of work." And judging from subsequent reports, this appeal had the desired effect. I love that sense of a community that comes together at a time of adversity, both in a natural sense, but also in an economic sense. And the second reading is by Ron Whatley, and occurs on a stretch of canal which I'm much more familiar with, and it's called The Day of the Iceberg. Ice, 3 or 4 inches in thickness, screeched, whined, cracked, buckled, and reluctantly broke as the narrow boat forced a jagged path into its chilly heart. These somewhat alien sounds mingled with the moody snarl of winter winds and the steady thump of Camborne's engine, producing an overall sonic assault that somehow helped us to ignore the cold as we clung to the cabin sides of the trembling boat. Ahead, the ice was an unbroken ribbon of white challenge that seemed to reach out endlessly, and had it not been for the sentinel-like trees on either side of the craft, it might have been possible to imagine that we were pioneering a passage through encrusted Arctic waters. Yet we were inland, on the Hertfordshire border, hesitantly moving in a rough southerly direction along the Grand Union Canal. Earlier, I had stood where the canal swings wide and proud at the junction of the Aylesbury Arm and the Grand Union, and marvelled at the wintry splendour of an ice-capped cut. It was as if time itself had been frozen from the way pieces of driftwood trapped in the ice, reached out from the canal at gravity-defying angles. An old motorcar tyre, relic of thoughtlessness, lay on the ice like a useless black lifebelt, surrounded by an assortment of stone and brick missiles that had probably been aimed with youthful exuberance. And then there was frosty silence, where water had once slapped and gurgled with freedom. Camborne, loaded with essential canal maintenance equipment, ascended the 7 locks of the Marsworth flight with difficulty. Darb, a big raw-boned man with carved granite features, was the steerer, who fussed and cussed the old gal to do her best, to hold course when the ice argued, while Sonny and I, when we weren't pushing and pulling on balance beams or winding paddles up and down, perched on the narrowboat's gunwales, hopefully trying to catch escaping warmth from the engine's cooling system. At something less than walking speed we moved through a charmed avenue of petrified trees and reeds that dipped and bowed as the narrowboat scrunched by. The last creature I expected to see on such a day was a swan. But this one commanded our attention. It had somehow become ensnared in the ice. "I feel sorry for the poor devils when they get trapped like that," Darb said. He's a keen racing pigeon fancier in his spare time, and possesses a rare knowledge of our feathered friends. "Hold on, we'll free you," he shouted to the struggling bird, and worked magic with the gears, throttle and helm, so that Camborne shattered the ice cladding that had imprisoned the bird. Awkwardly, the swan clambered over the ice floes to freedom, settling gratefully into the water left by our passing. Darb grinned with satisfaction and increased the speed of the boat. Sonny, a rotund man with the face of a retired pirate, had kept up an entertainingly ribald commentary throughout the journey. Now bringing his irrepressible sense of humour to the fore, he pointed with mock horror. "Iceberg ahead!" he yelled dramatically. We looked and laughed. 100 yards in front of Camborne's bows, 2 plastic milk crates, coloured red, lay on the unbroken ice, looking ridiculously incongruous in the light of Sonny's curt description. As we drew nearer, the canal moor showed darkly and swallowed them. And it was as we ponderously cut a passage through the frozen wastes on inland England that I thought of past generations of canalmen who had made similar winter trips. From early canal days when ice-breaking craft were hauled along by teams of horses, to the specially built motorized icebreakers that were essential to keep the roads free for commercial craft. And yet we were doing the job without that same kind of urgency, almost for the hell of it, really. 4 miles, 3 hours out from the depot, and Camborne arrived at her destination near Dudswell. The temperature had risen slightly, and it rained heavily during the last part of the journey. We were cold and wet, and rather glad when the time came to return to our homes by road. This is the narrowboat Erica, signing off and wishing you a very warm and cosy and restful and peaceful night. Good night. Temperature outside 2.1 degrees. Inside 21 degrees. Humidity 79%. Dew point -2 degrees. Wind direction east. Wind strength 9 miles per hour. Barometric pressure 1024, rising. Cloud cover 94%. Cloud ceiling 2,000 feet. Precipitation nil. Moon phase 98.1%, waning gibbous. Day length 9 hours 51 minutes. Sunset 17:17. Sky casting 7:24.